3 weeks after completing what would become the most banned film in cinema history, Pier Paolo Pasolini was found brutally murdered on a beach outside Rome. His body had been run over multiple times, beaten with metal rods, and set on fire. The official story? A prostitution deal gone wrong. The reality? Probably a political assassination. The film that may have gotten him killed was Saló, or The 120 Days of Sodom, a movie so disturbing that it's been banned in dozens of countries, censored for decades, and dismissed by most people as unwatchable exploitation. But here's what most people don't know. This film sits in the Criterion Collection alongside Citizen Kane and Seven Samurai. It's studied in universities worldwide, and it was created by one of Italy's most celebrated poets and intellectuals. In the next 15 minutes, I'm going to show you 10 shocking reasons why the most controversial film ever made is actually a work of profound political poetry that reveals truths about power that comfortable cinema could never achieve. This isn't about defending disturbing content. It's about understanding why some of the most important art in human history has always pushed boundaries that make us uncomfortable. But first, let me tell you why this matters more than you think. Reason number 1. The director was murdered 3 weeks after release. What if I told you that making a movie about the corruption of power literally got someone killed? November 2nd, 1975. Pier Paolo Pasolini's body was discovered on the beaches of Ostia, Italy. The official investigation concluded it was a sexual encounter gone wrong with a 17-year-old prostitute named Pino Pelosi. Case closed, right? Not even close. Here's what the official story doesn't explain. Pelosi was physically too small to overpower Pasolini, who was known to be strong and trained in martial arts. There were no marks on Pelosi indicating a fight, no blood on his clothes, and forensic evidence showed Pasolini was attacked by multiple people, not one teenager. In 2005, Pelosi finally told the truth. He recanted his confession and revealed that Pasolini was actually murdered by 5 members of a neo-fascist party. They beat him to death while calling him a dirty communist. Pelosi only took the blame because they threatened to kill his family. But here's the really disturbing part. The murder was connected to the film itself. Several months before his death, thieves had broken into the production office and stolen reels of Saló. Pasolini arranged to meet them on the night he died to get the film back. Think about that for a second. Pasolini knew his film was dangerous. He knew he was making enemies. But he made it anyway because he believed the message was that important. And when someone stole his work, he risked his life to get it back. The case was reopened in 2005, the same day Pasolini's close friend Sergio Chiti died under mysterious circumstances. Coincidence? In Italy in the 1970s, political dissidents had a habit of dying in accidents. So what was in this film that was worth killing for? That brings us to our second point. Reason number 2. It's actually based on philosophy, not shock value. Most people think Saló is just sick exploitation, but what if I told you it's actually based on one of the most important philosophical works about human freedom ever written? The film is adapted from the Marquis de Sade's 120 Days of Sodom, written in the 18th century. Now before you roll your eyes, hear me out. De Sade wasn't just creating shocking literature for kicks. He was developing a radical philosophy about power, authority, and human nature that challenged every assumption of his society. Here's de Sade's central argument. All authority, religious, political, moral, is ultimately based on violence and coercion. The only way to truly understand the nature of power is to examine it in its most extreme forms, stripped of all pretense and social niceties. Remember, de Sade was writing during the French Revolution, when the supposedly civilized aristocracy was literally losing their heads. He saw through the polite facades of his society to the violence that was always lurking beneath. De Sade argued that true freedom could only come through complete transgression of social norms, not because transgression was good, but because only by breaking every rule could you discover which rules were actually necessary and which were just tools of oppression. This philosophy influenced everyone from Nietzsche to Foucault to feminist theorists who recognized that challenging sexual taboos was inseparable from challenging political power structures. What I find fascinating is that he spent most of his life in prison for his ideas. The authorities understood that his work wasn't just literature, it was a direct challenge to the foundations of their power. And this is exactly why Pasolini was drawn to de Sade's work, because he saw the same patterns of hidden violence in 1970s Italy that de Sade had exposed in 18th century France. Reason number 3. The disgusting scenes are brilliant metaphors. Okay, let's address the elephant in the room. Yes, there are scenes in this film that are absolutely revolting, but what if those scenes aren't there to shock you? What if they're there to wake you up? The most infamous sequence involves the characters being forced to consume human excrement. I'm not going to show you that, obviously, but I need you to understand what Pasolini was actually doing here. Pasolini himself said that the coprophagia was a metaphor for fast food, processed, unnatural food forced upon the world, growing like a cancer. Think about it. What's more disgusting, literal shit, or the fact that McDonald's was one of the first Western businesses to move into Russia after the collapse of the Soviet Union? But we can expand this metaphor beyond just fast food. Think about all of mass-produced culture, the homogeneous, bad-tasting content that gets force-fed to us daily. Hollywood blockbusters, reality TV, social media algorithms designed to keep us consuming mindlessly. In the film, the elites enjoy force-feeding their subjects this degrading substance under unrivaled authority. They gladly humiliate the tortured with more filth to feast on. Sound familiar? We live in a world where billionaire tech CEOs decide what information we see, what products we buy, what culture we consume. They've created systems where we eagerly participate in our own degradation, scrolling endlessly, buying things we don't need, consuming content that makes us stupider and angrier. When I first understood this metaphor, it completely changed how I see modern media. Pasolini wasn't just making a gross-out film, he was showing us exactly what our relationship with mass culture looks like when you strip away all the pretty packaging. But the metaphors go even deeper when you look at who's doing the force-feeding. Reason number 4. The 4 villains represent all power structures. Here's where Pasolini's genius really shows. The 4 main antagonists aren't just random bad guys, they're a systematic breakdown of how power actually works in society. Meet the 4 libertines. The Duke represents aristocracy and inherited wealth. The Bishop represents religious authority. The Magistrate represents the legal system. And the President represents political power. These aren't separate institutions, they're all working together. In the film, they collaborate to create a closed system where they have absolute power over their victims. Sound like any society you know? What's brilliant is that Pasolini shows these aren't powerful, intimidating figures. They're weak, impotent men who can only get aroused through increasingly extreme acts of domination. They need a steady stream of violence and degradation just to feel alive. Think about the powerful people in our world. How many of them seem genuinely fulfilled? How many seem to need constant validation, constant control, constant stimulation? Jeffrey Epstein, Harvey Weinstein, the endless parade of politicians and CEOs caught in scandals. They're all variations of Pasolini's libertines. The film shows that their power would not exist without the military's presence. The soldiers are complicit, even participating in the debauchery. This is Pasolini saying that all authority ultimately rests on the threat of violence. What struck me most is how the libertines treat the victims like interchangeable commodities. There's a scene where they inspect the prisoners in the dark, looking only at their bodies, unable to tell if they're looking at a man or woman. They've been reduced to products on a shelf. And speaking of those victims, their identity reveals something even more disturbing about what Pasolini was really critiquing. Reason number 5. The victims are Italy's future being consumed. This is where the film's political message becomes crystal clear, and it's absolutely heartbreaking when you understand it. The victims aren't random people, they're specifically chosen to represent Italian youth, the future of the country. Pasolini is showing how fascism literally consumes the next generation, turning them into objects for the pleasure and power of the ruling class. The film is set in the final days of Mussolini's Italian Social Republic, the Nazi puppet state that existed in northern Italy from 1943 to 1945. This wasn't arbitrary, it was surgical precision. Throughout the film, we see the systematic destruction of these young people's humanity. They're put on leashes, forced to act like animals, stripped of their names and identities. This is what fascism does to a society's future. It dehumanizes and destroys it. But here's what makes it even more relevant. Pasolini wasn't just critiquing historical fascism. He was warning about what he called neo-fascism, the way corporate consumer culture was doing the same thing to Italian youth in the 1970s. Think about how our society treats young people today. Student debt that turns them into economic slaves. Social media algorithms designed to exploit their insecurities. A gig economy that offers no stability or future. Corporate culture that demands they sacrifice their health, relationships, and values for profit. What's most disturbing is how the film shows some of the victims becoming complicit in their own destruction. By the end, some of the young men are participating in the torture of others, having been groomed to become the next generation of oppressors. This is Pasolini's most terrifying prediction, that the system doesn't just destroy people, it turns them into willing participants in destroying others. But Pasolini didn't just throw these images at us randomly. He structured the entire film using one of the greatest works of literature ever written. Reason number 6. It's structured like Dante's Inferno. What if I told you that this seemingly chaotic nightmare is actually following the precise structure of one of the most revered poems in Western literature. Pasolini divided Salò into 4 parts that mirror Dante's journey through hell. We start with the INFERNO, the vestibule of hell. Then we descend through 3 circles: the circle of obsessions, the circle of poop, and finally the circle of blood. This isn't just pretentious art house nonsense. Dante's Inferno is fundamentally about the corruption of power and the consequences of abandoning moral principles. By using this structure, Pasolini is placing his critique of modern society within the tradition of the greatest moral literature ever written. Just like Dante's Hell, each circle represents a deeper level of moral corruption. The obsessions represent the psychological manipulation, the shit represents the cultural degradation, and the blood represents the ultimate violence that all power structures rest on. But here's what's brilliant. Unlike Dante, Pasolini offers no redemption, no Beatrice to guide us to paradise. His hell is a closed system with no escape, because he believed that's what consumer capitalism had created, a world where the powerful can commit any atrocity without consequence. The literary framework elevates the film beyond mere shock value. It's saying, this isn't exploitation, this is moral instruction. This is what hell looks like when it's run by the people who are supposed to protect us. When I realized this structure, it completely changed how I watched the film. Every scene isn't just random violence, it's a carefully constructed descent into the heart of institutional evil. But here's something that makes the film even more unsettling. People making it had no idea what they were creating. Reason number 7. The cast had no idea how disturbing it would be. Picture this. You're an actor showing up to what you think is an art film by one of Italy's most respected directors. The atmosphere on set is actually pretty fun. People are playing pranks, having football matches with other film crews, generally enjoying themselves. What you don't know is that the director isn't telling anyone what's going to happen in each scene until minutes before filming. Pasolini kept the full script secret from most of the cast because he wanted their reactions to be genuine. Many of the actors weren't even professional performers. They were just people Pasolini found who had the right look or energy. They'd show up, get minimal direction, and film scenes without understanding the larger context. One actor later said that when he finally saw the completed film in theaters, he was so shocked he had to leave halfway through. He couldn't believe he'd been part of something so intense. The film's disturbing nature was created almost entirely in the editing room. Pasolini would film relatively tame individual scenes, then combine them with sound, music, and other footage to create the final nightmarish effect. This technique actually makes the film more powerful. The actor's genuine confusion and discomfort comes through on screen, making everything feel more real and unsettling. But despite being created through this chaotic process, the film has earned recognition in the most prestigious circles of cinema. Reason number 8, it's been studied in universities for decades. Here's something that might surprise you. Saló sits in the Criterion Collection, the most prestigious archive of important cinema in the world. It's right there next to Citizen Kane, Seven Samurai, and 8½. This isn't some accident or controversy for controversy's sake. The Criterion Collection doesn't include films just because they're shocking. They include films that are cinematically and culturally significant. The film is taught in film schools and universities around the world, not as an example of exploitation, but as a masterclass in political cinema and visual metaphor. Film scholars have written hundreds of academic papers analyzing its themes, structure, and cultural impact. It's been the subject of entire conferences and symposiums. Film scholars have written hundreds of academic papers analyzing its themes, structure, and cultural impact. It's been the subject of entire conferences and symposiums. Universities don't teach films that are just shock value. They teach films that reveal something important about human nature, political systems, or artistic expression. The fact that Saló is studied alongside Eisenstein and Kurosawa tells you everything you need to know about its true artistic merit. When I started researching this, I was shocked to find how much serious academic writing exists about this film. These aren't exploitation film fans. These are serious scholars who see something profound in Pasolini's work. The themes the academics focus on, the relationship between power and violence, the role of media in social control, the way authority figures use degradation to maintain control, these are more relevant today than ever. But it's not just the intellectual content that makes this film remarkable, it's how Pasolini chose to present that content. Reason number 9. The beautiful cinematography makes it more disturbing. Here's where Pasolini's genius as a filmmaker really shows. This isn't some gritty handheld exploitation film shot in dark basements. It's gorgeous. Every shot is composed with the same careful attention to visual beauty as Pasolini's earlier masterpieces like The Gospel According to St. Matthew. The lighting is elegant, the camera movements are graceful, the costumes and set design are exquisite. This creates something way more disturbing than ugly imagery depicting ugly actions. When you present horror through beautiful cinematography, it forces the viewer to confront their own relationship with violence and power. This technique has precedent in other art forms. Goya's Saturn devouring his son is painted with exquisite technique depicting horrific content. Bach's St. Matthew Passion uses sublime music to depict the torture and execution of Christ. Pasolini is essentially arguing that comfortable art that only shows us beauty, that only confirms our existing beliefs, is actually a form of lie. It presents a sanitized version of reality that prevents us from understanding the full spectrum of human experience. What strikes me about Saló is how it refuses to let viewers off the hook. You can't dismiss it as just exploitation because of its obvious artistic sophistication. You can't ignore it as just art because of its visceral impact. The beauty of the form makes the horror of the content more, not less, impactful. It's like being served poison in a crystal glass. The elegance makes the danger more acute. And this artistic choice becomes even more powerful when you realize how accurately the film predicted our current world. Reason number 10. It predicted modern consumer culture perfectly. Here's the most unsettling thing about Saló. Pasolini made it in 1975, but he was describing 2025. Think about the world we live in now. A handful of ultra-wealthy individuals control what information we see, what products we buy, what culture we consume. They've created systems where we eagerly participate in our own degradation. The film shows people being force-fed excrement while being told it's good for them. Today we have algorithms designed to feed us content that makes us angry, depressed, and addicted, while tech companies tell us it's connecting the world. The libertines in the film create arbitrary rules that serve only their pleasure and power. Today, we have terms of service agreements that change constantly, surveillance systems that monitor our every move, and economic systems that force people to work multiple jobs just to survive. Pasolini warned about the destruction of authentic local culture by mass consumerism. Today, you can go to any city in the world and find the same chain stores, the same fast food, the same corporate-produced entertainment. The film shows how power structures work together: political, religious, legal, and economic authorities collaborating to maintain control. Today, we see the same thing. Politicians funded by corporations, religious leaders endorsing political candidates, legal systems that protect the wealthy. What's most disturbing is how the film shows people becoming complicit in their own oppression. Today, we see people defending billionaires who exploit them, supporting politicians who harm them, consuming media that degrades them. Pasolini died for making this film, but his warning is more relevant than ever. We're living in the world he predicted, we just don't want to admit it. Even its bans prove its point. Here's the ultimate irony. The fact that Saló has been banned and censored around the world actually validates everything Pasolini was trying to say. The film argues that authority figures will use any means necessary to suppress ideas that threaten their power. And what happened? Authority figures around the world used their power to suppress the film. It's been banned in dozens of countries, censored for decades, and even today, many streaming platforms won't carry it. In some places, just owning a copy can get you arrested. The censorship proves Pasolini's point about how power works. The film shows authority figures silencing dissent through violence and control. The real world responded by silencing the film through violence and control. Today we see the same patterns with different tools. Instead of outright bans, we have shadow banning, demonetization, and algorithmic suppression. The methods change, but the goal remains the same: control the narrative. The fact that this film still makes people uncomfortable 50 years later means it's still doing its job. Art that challenges power will always be controversial because power never wants to be challenged. So there you have it. 10 shocking reasons why the most banned film in cinema history is actually a masterpiece of political poetry that uses extreme art to reveal truths about power that comfortable cinema could never achieve. Pier Paolo Pasolini died for his commitment to authentic artistic expression, but his legacy lives on in every artist who chooses truth over comfort, who risks everything to show us what we need to see rather than what we want to see. But there's something I didn't tell you at the start of this video. The principle I just showed you, that the most important art often disturbs us, applies to far more than just controversial films. Throughout history, the works that have fundamentally changed how we see ourselves and our world have almost always been the ones that made their original audiences deeply uncomfortable. If you want to see me explore more movies and their hidden meanings, please subscribe to the channel. And if this video changed how you think about the relationship between art and truth, drop a comment below and tell me about a work of art that disturbed you but ultimately expanded your understanding of the world. Thanks for having the courage to engage with difficult ideas, and remember, the art that makes us most uncomfortable is often the art we need most. Keep questioning, keep growing, and I'll see you in the next one.